The cold wind whipped through Ifeoma's hair as she stood outside the car, the doors slamming shut behind her. She stared at Jihun, the man she had loved and sacrificed so much for, now standing just a few feet away, his back turned to her. "I can't do this anymore, Ifeoma. It's over. I'm done." Jihun's words were as sharp as the winter air, cutting through the silence between them. She could feel the sting of betrayal in the pit of her stomach, a pain so deep it was almost unbearable. Her hands trembled, gripping the car seat with their daughter, Yuna, still inside, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside. Ifeoma's heart raced, her chest tightening with the weight of Jihun's betrayal. His coldness felt like an ice storm, one that froze everything they had built together. "You're leaving me? After everything we've been through?" Ifeoma's voice cracked, a mix of hurt and disbelief escaping her lips. She couldn't understand. How could the man she trusted the most, the father of their child, do this to her? Jihun didn't look back. He didn't meet her gaze. His face remained unreadable as he stared ahead, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I'm in love with someone else, Ifeoma. Minji is everything I need right now." His words were final, leaving no room for argument, no space for reconciliation. It felt as if her entire world had just crumbled in front of her. If you're feeling that same shock I felt, subscribe to Mystic Tale by Luna. Because what happened next changed everything we thought we knew about family, love, and the choices we make to protect the people we love most. Ifeoma's mind raced, trying to grasp the reality of the situation. This wasn't the man she married. This wasn't the man who had promised to build a life with her. Jihun's phone buzzed in his pocket, a new message lighting up the screen. Ifeoma could see Minji's name on the notification. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was undeniable. Jihun was not only leaving her, he was already living a lie with someone else. Her heart shattered, and her breath caught in her throat. "How could you do this?" she whispered, the question hanging in the air, unanswered. Ifeoma glanced around, her surroundings suddenly feeling foreign, cold. This wasn't the life she envisioned. She had come from Nigeria, from a family that had instilled in her values of loyalty, of strength, of standing by her partner no matter the odds. She had crossed oceans, learned a new language, adapted to a new culture, all for this family. And now, Jihun, the man she thought she could trust with her whole heart, was throwing it all away. The wind seemed to howl louder, as if nature itself was mourning her pain. Ifeoma didn't know how long she stood there, frozen in place, feeling the full weight of the moment. Jihun turned and began to walk away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. "Don't walk away from me, Jihun," Ifeoma shouted, her voice raw and desperate. But he didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. It was as if she no longer mattered. Ifeoma's thoughts began to spiral, each one more painful than the last. She had always known that being in a cross-cultural marriage wouldn't be easy. She had faced the sideways glances, the whispered judgments, the disapproving looks from Jihun's family. But she had endured. For him. For their family. She had given everything she had to make this work. But now, standing in the middle of the street, alone, she realized just how little her sacrifices had meant to him. How had it all come to this? She was losing her husband, the man who had once promised her the world. She had loved him so fiercely, so completely, but now, in the cold light of reality, it felt as though she had been nothing more than an afterthought to him. Her heart ached as she looked at their car, the one they had bought together, the one that had been part of their dream. It was just a car. Just a symbol of everything they had worked for. And yet, it now felt like a cruel reminder of the life she had lost. Ifeoma's phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, still shaken, and saw a text from Heian, her best friend. "I'm here for you. Don't forget, you deserve better. Call me if you need anything." Ifeoma felt the tears welling up in her eyes but swallowed them down. She couldn't cry in front of him. Not now. Not like this. Not after everything. She looked back at the car, at the seat where their daughter was still fast asleep. She had to keep it together, for Yuna. For herself. Jihun's actions had shattered her, but she refused to let them define her. She would not let him destroy everything she had built. I'm done, Ifeoma whispered to herself, the words barely audible above the wind. She wasn't going to let Jihun break her. She was stronger than that. She walked to the passenger door, opened it, and sat in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Yuna shifted in her seat, her soft breath the only sound that comforted Ifeoma. She wiped away the tears that had begun to fall, steeling herself for what was to come. As she started the car and pulled away from the curb, a voice inside her head whispered, "This is not the end. This is just the beginning." The road ahead was uncertain, but Ifeoma knew one thing for sure, she would not let Jihun's betrayal break her. She had a life to rebuild, a future to create. And no one, least of all him, could take that away from her. Ifeoma's heart was still pounding as she drove away, the weight of Jihun's cold words echoing in her mind. She looked in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the empty street behind her, where he had left her standing. The cool air that had once felt invigorating now felt suffocating, and she couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that clung to her like a second skin. The worst part was, she had seen it coming. If you've ever felt invisible in your own marriage, share your story below and subscribe to Mystic Tale by Luna to hear more. She had never been fully accepted into Jihun's world. They had been married for 5 years now, but even after all this time, it felt like she was always an outsider. When she first moved to Seoul, Ifeoma had been determined to fit in. She had worked hard to adapt to the language, the customs, the food, and the ways of life. She was used to the cultural differences. Growing up in Nigeria, she had learned the value of patience and sacrifice. But Jihun's world was different. The expectations placed on him by his family and society had never quite meshed with her own values. "Are you sure you can handle this, Ifeoma?" Jihun's mother had asked her once, in that sweet, condescending tone that made Ifeoma feel like she was being sized up. "Our family is important. You know that, don't you?" Ifeoma had nodded, smiling tightly, even though she felt like a stranger in their world. The subtle judgments, the offhand remarks about her skin color, the quiet disapproval, it all started to weigh heavily on her. Jihun, at first, seemed like the one person who understood her struggle, but over time, his loyalty seemed to waver. Every now and then, there would be a flicker of doubt in his eyes when they discussed their future. She could see the way his family looked at him, proud but also questioning his choice in her. As she turned down the street to her apartment, Ifeoma tried to focus on the road, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Jihun. He had always been charming, kind, and loving when they first met. They had shared so many dreams, so many hopes. But now, everything felt like a lie. She had been in denial for far too long, allowing herself to believe that the cultural differences could be overcome. That love could conquer everything. But now, she was faced with the painful truth. Love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between who they were and what they needed. At the apartment, Ifeoma parked the car and sat for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. She could hear the faint sound of Yuna's soft breathing from the back seat, her daughter still oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded. Ifeoma closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She didn't know what to do next. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to let Jihun's betrayal define her. She had to be strong for Yuna, for herself. She got out of the car and walked toward the building, her heels clicking against the pavement. The familiar sounds of the city seemed distant, muffled by the storm brewing inside her. As she entered the lobby, the receptionist gave her a polite smile, but Ifeoma barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation, the finality of Jihoon's words. "I'm done with you," he had said. "I'm with Minji now. She's everything I need." Minji. The name alone made Ifeoma's blood boil. She had met Minji a few times, always with a polite smile, always the picture of grace and elegance. Jihoon's new lover. She was younger, more refined, and, by all appearances, everything Jihoon's family had always wanted for him. Ifeoma had always known there was something off about their relationship, but she had never imagined it would go this far. Inside her apartment, Ifeoma sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. She didn't know how long she had been there when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Heian. "Ifeoma, I'm so sorry. Please, let me know you're okay. If you need to talk, I'm here." Ifeoma's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she considered her response. Heian had been her rock in all of this, the one person who understood her the most. But now, even Heian's words felt hollow. How could anyone understand this kind of pain? How could anyone offer comfort when it felt like everything she had worked for had just been ripped away from her? She typed back a short message. "I'm okay. I'll talk to you later." She didn't feel like talking. Not yet. Yuna stirred in the other room, her tiny voice calling out to her. Ifeoma wiped her tears quickly, forcing a smile as she walked to her daughter's room. Yuna's innocent face lit up when she saw her, her small arms reaching out for a hug. Ifeoma held her close, the warmth of her daughter's embrace reminding her of the one thing that still kept her going. "I love you, Mama," Yuna said, her voice full of the purest love. Ifeoma's heart cracked, but she smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. "I love you too, baby. Always." As she tucked Yuna back into bed, Ifeoma sat beside her for a moment, staring at the ceiling. She had spent so many years trying to make her marriage work, trying to fit into a world that was never truly hers. But now, she realized she had to let go. For her sake, for Yuna's sake, she needed to rebuild her life. The man she had once trusted, the man she had sacrificed everything for, was no longer the man she knew. And she couldn't keep holding on to a lie. It was time to let go of the past. She didn't know what the future held, but she was going to face it with strength. For herself. For Yuna. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was Jihoon. "I'm sorry, Ifeoma. Please, let's talk. I never wanted it to end like this." Ifeoma stared at the message for a moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. But she didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she turned off her phone and took a deep breath. Tomorrow, she would start the next chapter of her life. One where she no longer let Jihoon define her worth. One where she would rediscover who she was, without him. And that journey, she realized, would be the hardest one yet. Ifeoma hadn't spoken to Jihoon in over 2 weeks. After the confrontation in the street, after she'd driven away from their home, the silence had been deafening. She had expected anger, regret, or even some form of apology from him, but there had been nothing. Only silence. The cold, suffocating silence of someone who had already moved on. Her phone remained on silent mode, never ringing, never buzzing. Jihoon's texts were sparse and lacked any real meaning. "Can we talk?" he had written once. "I never wanted things to end like this." Ifeoma didn't bother to reply. She knew that the words he spoke were empty. The man she once loved, the man who had promised her the world, was now a ghost in her life. And in his place stood a man who had already moved on, holding on to a future with someone else. But Jihoon's absence was not the only thing Ifeoma had to adjust to. Her world had shifted in a way she couldn't have anticipated. Every day felt like she was walking through fog, her emotions a chaotic mess she was desperately trying to piece together. Yet, in the midst of the emotional wreckage, one thought remained clear: she had to rebuild. For herself. For Yuna. There were nights when Ifeoma would find herself sitting by the window, staring at the lights of the city, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. When she had first arrived in Seoul, she had been full of hope. She had dreamed of a future with Jihun, of raising their children in a home filled with love, of blending her Nigerian heritage with his Korean roots. But instead, her dreams had been torn apart, replaced with the cruel reality of betrayal. The hardest part, Ifeoma had learned, wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the way it had all been so easily discarded. Jihun had left her for someone who seemed to fit into his world better than she ever could. Minji, his new girlfriend, was everything that Ifeoma was not. She was the product of his family's expectations, young, beautiful, and most importantly, Korean. In Minji, Jihun found someone who didn't challenge his world, someone who would make his family proud, someone who could be easily molded into the woman they expected him to marry. Ifeoma had spent years adapting, trying to make Jihun's world her own. She had learned the language, tried to understand the cultural nuances, and accepted the pressure of living up to his family's expectations. She had thought that love could bridge the gap. But now, as she sat in their empty apartment, with the silence echoing around her, she realized how naive that belief had been. But even as she grappled with her heartache, Ifeoma was determined not to let this define her. She had never been the type to sit idly by and let life pass her by. She was a fighter, raised in Nigeria where resilience was a way of life. Her mother had taught her that no matter how hard life gets, you stand tall. You face the storm and keep going. And that's what Ifeoma did. She threw herself into work, finding solace in the small tasks that made her feel like she still had control over her life. She started taking on more projects at the marketing firm she worked for, pushing herself harder than ever before. But even in the midst of her professional success, there were moments of weakness. Moments when she would feel the weight of her loneliness, when the silence in her apartment felt suffocating, when she wondered if she would ever feel whole again. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after betrayal, share your story below and subscribe to Mystic Tale by Luna to hear more. Heian, her best friend, had been a constant support, calling her almost every day, checking in, offering a shoulder to cry on. Heian had been there when Ifeoma first moved to Seoul, had been there when Jihun and Ifeoma had met, had been there through all the good times. Now, Heian was there, too, through the bad. But as much as she tried to help, there was nothing anyone could do to take away the pain of betrayal. One afternoon, about a month after Jihun had left her, Ifeoma decided it was time to visit her family back in Nigeria. She hadn't been home in years, and the thought of returning to the warmth of her people, to the comfort of familiar faces, felt like the balm her wounded soul needed. Yuna, her daughter, was excited at the prospect of visiting her grandparents, and the idea of reconnecting with her roots was a welcome distraction for Ifeoma. She spent weeks preparing for the trip, organizing everything for Yuna's school, making sure all her work commitments were settled. But even as the day of her departure drew closer, the thought of facing her family with the truth of her failed marriage was daunting. Her parents had always been supportive, but Ifeoma knew they would be disappointed. It wasn't just that her marriage had ended, it was the way it had ended. The shame of Jihun's betrayal weighed heavily on her, even though she knew it wasn't her fault. When the day came to leave, Ifeoma kissed Yuna goodbye, the two of them heading to the airport, their bags packed and their hearts heavy with anticipation. The flight was long, but Ifeoma barely noticed the time. She spent most of it looking out the window, her mind a swirl of thoughts about her future, about the life she had once dreamed of having, and about the woman she had now become. When they landed in Lagos, Ifeoma felt a sense of relief wash over her. She was home, back in the place that had shaped her, back in the country where she felt connected to her roots. Her family was waiting for her at the airport, and as soon as she stepped through the gates, the familiar sight of her parents and siblings was a welcome comfort. Her mother rushed to embrace her, pulling her close. "Ifeoma, my dear," her mother said, her voice filled with warmth and concern. "It's been too long. You look like you've been through a storm. Ifeoma smiled, but the sadness in her eyes was undeniable. It's been a hard few months, Mama. But I'm here now. I'm ready to heal. As Ifeoma embraced her family, the weight of everything that had happened in Seoul seemed to lift, even if only for a moment. She knew that the road to healing would be long, but as she stood in the arms of her loved ones, she felt the first flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. A way to rebuild, not just her life, but her very sense of self. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of possibility. And that was enough for now. Ifeoma stood in the kitchen, the soft hum of the stove the only sound in the otherwise quiet apartment. Yuna was playing in the living room, her innocent laughter echoing through the space. The comforting smell of simmering stew filled the air, grounding Ifeoma in the present moment. It had been weeks since her return from Nigeria, and although the heaviness in her heart had not fully lifted, the days were slowly starting to feel less suffocating. Ifeoma's thoughts had been swirling since she'd returned to Seoul, but she hadn't told her family about the final confrontation with Jihun. They had always assumed that the love story between her and Jihun was one of their proudest achievements. It was the story of overcoming cultural boundaries and building a life together, of proving that love could conquer all. But now, that narrative had come crashing down, leaving her to pick up the pieces of a life she never imagined she'd have to rebuild. She had spent weeks wrestling with whether she should reach out to Jihun. Despite the betrayal, a part of her still wanted to believe in the man she had married. But each time she picked up her phone to send a message, she was reminded of his coldness, of how easily he had let her go. He had abandoned her, choosing someone else over their family, and Ifeoma knew she couldn't keep clinging to a man who no longer valued her. The phone buzzed on the counter, pulling Ifeoma from her thoughts. She picked it up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Jihun's name on the screen. For a moment, she hesitated, fingers hovering over the message notification. But then, something inside her shifted. She wasn't that woman anymore, the one who clung to someone who never truly saw her. She wasn't going to let him back into her life, not after everything that had happened. With a deep breath, Ifeoma turned off her phone and placed it face down on the counter. It felt like a small but significant victory. She had made the decision to stop waiting for him to come back, to stop allowing his presence to dictate her worth. She was done being defined by someone else's actions. The woman she had been was no longer the woman she needed to be. The days passed, and Ifeoma found herself growing stronger, more at peace with her choices. There were still moments of doubt, moments when she missed the idea of the life she and Jihun had once built. But those moments were fading, slowly replaced with the realization that she had a new life to build. A life where she didn't need to hide behind anyone else's expectations or sacrifices. One evening, as Ifeoma and Yuna sat down to dinner, her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't ignore it. She picked it up, her heart racing slightly when she saw the message. "I'm sorry for everything, Ifeoma. I never should have let it come to this. Please, can we talk? If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after betrayal, share your story below and subscribe to Mystic Tale by Luna to hear more." Ifeoma stared at the screen, the words burning through her like fire. There it was, his apology. The words she had longed to hear, yet now they felt hollow. It had taken him so long to even acknowledge the pain he had caused. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type out a response. But then she paused, reflecting on everything she had learned over the past few months. She had spent so many years trying to make a relationship work, compromising who she was, compromising her own values. She had tried to make Jihun fit into her world and her world fit into his. And for what? The silence between them had stretched too long. The wounds had been too deep. The trust she had once placed in him had been shattered, and no number of apologies could undo the damage. Ifeoma had spent far too long forgiving him for things that should never have happened in the first place. I've moved on, Jihoon. I hope you find what you're looking for with Minji. Ifeoma hit send, her finger trembling slightly. There it was. The final piece of closure she needed. She wasn't the same woman she had been when Jihoon had left her. She had rediscovered herself. She had found strength in her own heart. And that strength had brought her to this moment, a moment where she could finally let go. As the days went by, Ifeoma found herself gradually letting go of the pain that had held her captive for so long. She poured her energy into her work, building new relationships and reconnecting with her passions. She had started volunteering at a local community center, helping other women who had gone through similar struggles. She found solace in knowing that her experience could help others, that her story could inspire women who had been left behind to find their own path to healing. But there were still moments when she missed the life she thought she would have. The nights when Yuna asked where Jihoon was, the times when she saw families on the street, laughing and holding hands, the images of what might have been. It was during these moments of vulnerability that Ifeoma would pause, take a deep breath, and remind herself of the strength she had found within. She wasn't defined by Jihoon or the life she thought she'd have. She was creating something new, something more true to herself. One evening, after putting Yuna to bed, Ifeoma sat on the balcony of her apartment, the city lights twinkling below her. She thought about the journey she had taken, the heartache and the healing, the pain and the growth. She had made it through, stronger than ever before. She had learned that love was not something to be sacrificed for, not something to be given away without boundaries. Love, she had come to realize, was something that began with self-respect, with knowing your own worth. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She stood up and walked toward the door, wondering who it could be. When she opened it, she was surprised to see Heian standing there, a bright smile on her face. "You look like you've been thinking about the world," Heian said, stepping inside. "You're glowing." Ifeoma smiled, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. "I'm starting to see the world differently, Heian. I've learned that you don't need to sacrifice yourself for anyone. The only love you can't live without is the love you have for yourself. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after betrayal, share your story below and subscribe to Mystic Tale by Luna to hear more." Heian nodded, her smile wide. "I think you found it. You found yourself, Ifeoma. And that's the greatest love of all." Ifeoma sat down on the couch, her heart at peace. There would be challenges ahead, but she was ready for them. She had finally learned to put herself first, to build a life that was her own, free from the chains of betrayal. And as she sat there with Heian, she realized that the journey had only just begun.